Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, Scarlett Johansson attempts to tap into 100% of her brain's capacity in Lucy. Dusty Crophopper attempts to join the fire and rescue team in a sequel to last year's Planes. And Dwayne Johnson attempts to tell the story of Hercules, the second film to do so this year. We'll also review Zach Braff's Wish I Was Here, and in our home media moment, Elijah Wood and John Cusack in the thriller Grand Piano. Inspired by Lucy, our top 5 this week is all about drugs created for the movies. And our triple feature of older films is new classic American Hustle, Justin's pick for old classic Brick, and the Oscar A to Z American History X. A lot of ground to cover this week, so let's get right into it. And we start with Lucy, which had a surprising 45 million debut this weekend. Justin's going to tell us about that.
Alrighty, Lucy, played by Scarlett Johansson, is a young woman forced against her will to carry a mysterious drug that allows the user to increase their brain capacity exponentially in her body. Though once the bags she's carrying start leaking, Lucy uncovers abilities inside herself that transcend all human logic. Director Luc Besson's no stranger to the action genre, but some of his entries are far more style over substance than others. That said, props to Besson seems warranted for taking a storyline that has roots in many different films, such as Limitless from a couple years back and the anime classic Akira, and attempting, keyword there, to tell it in an intelligent, albeit fun way. Unfortunately, because of a running time of just shy of 90 minutes, much of this feels very rushed and often comes off as a bit pretentious, such as, do we honestly need a crosscut of a mousetrap to foreshadow things to come? Given that Lucy's essentially becoming a godlike being, I can somewhat forgive the monotone performance Johansson offers up, but given the weak supporting cast, notably Morgan Freeman as a professor that serves really no greater purpose than to give exposition about some of the deeper themes of the movie, this ends up sticking out much more than it probably should. I can't say Lucy's going to be everyone's cup of tea, but in this age of action thrillers being an excuse for high body counts and explosions with little else, I really have to admire attempting a more intelligent approach, and I give it a B-.
Joe, what'd you think of Lucy?
I guess when it comes to Lucy, I would just pretty much echo Justin in this particular area. I think that there's definitely some of the Luc Besson style over substance, as he mentioned. I definitely liked some of the cinematography for the movie. I liked some of the editing. I thought Johansson did a good job. I mean, generally she does. However, I did feel like the movie did move by so fast that you really didn't have time to take it all in. Like, things did kind of come at a breakneck pace a lot of the time. And I also feel like there was kind of a tonal issue with the movie where it went from being really gritty and serious to being kind of silly almost constantly. So I wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it sometimes. Still, I did feel like it was trying to be intelligent, but perhaps a little smarter than it thinks it is. Despite this, though, it did have a lot of charm, and I think it was probably Johansson herself. And I didn't really think that the supporting cast was terrible. I think it was definitely uplifted enough to keep it entertaining for me, and I would also give it a B-.
Well, I think you'll hear some echoing in actually both of what you had to say. First of all the movies that we're reviewing this week, at least in the new release portion, I would say Lucy has the strongest story. Not the most original, but at least the most interesting. How effectively it pulls it off, I think, will be a matter of debate, but Johansson continues to prove that she can play ball with the big boys of action, and with this being her first starring actioner, she really hits it out of the park. The film poses some truly great questions about our mind, our bodies, and our world, but really fails to go deeper into them and ends up as a run-of-the-mill thriller with supposed brain power. Joe, you mentioned the tone, and I could not agree more. The tone is erratic, and it shifts from believability to ridiculousness, from sharp ideas to standard gun violence, and I think it hurts the overall messages that I think the film was trying to convey. But I have to admit, I certainly wasn't bored with it. I just don't think it was quite the film that I thought it was going to be based on the trailers, and I also give it a B-.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I could definitely understand people having issues with it. Like, when I was leaving the theater, I was thinking, this is a movie that definitely has a lot of problems, but it's still really fun, and it still is trying to say some really smart things. Mm-hmm. It's kind of unique enough that I can't really say it was a bad movie.
No.
You know, it was very enjoyable. I liked it. It's just that it was so underdeveloped. It was a little unfortunate.
Would either of you think that it might be an issue of possibly trying to become gentrified? Trying not to be overly brainy and still trying to be a fun action
Oh,
movie.
marketed to a mass audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was sort of like toned down. Like, I think that's one reason why it's actually getting decent reviews is because general audiences might go into it not understanding everything, but maybe that's one reason it was kept kind of basic. So it was just enough to get people thinking,
Right.
give them an idea of like, that is very interesting. This is kind of cool science fiction. Because when I was in the theater, I was observing some people. Everybody seemed really into it. Like, you could tell people were really thinking about these little speeches when Morgan Freeman's giving his exposition or when they're having a cutscene to like the universe or something. There's some really interesting ideas that are put forth here, and I think that you really don't see that in an action movie. And
I agree.
That's just a really interesting contrast. And Luc Besson's kind of done that before in some of his films.
He's always tried to be approachable with his general storytelling.
But the thing is, he does tend to have subject matter that usually gets you thinking.
More or less, but I mean, he's always trying to make it approachable.
The delivery, you're right. The delivery is something that definitely, you can tell it's being sold to major audiences, but it's not your typical fare. It rarely is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you put this side by side with some of the other action movies we've gotten this summer, Transformers, excluding, Edge of Tomorrow, which we all really liked.
Yeah.
A lot of the, quote unquote, summer blockbusters aren't of the thinking variety.
And this is an action sci-fi too. It's
It
Edge
is.
of Tomorrow. Well, I guess to compare it to that, why would Edge of Tomorrow work better? Is it because it had a longer running time, better cast, maybe more fleshed out ideas?
I think actually the longer running time did serve to flesh out the ideas a little bit more, get more character development, and I think that actually is a good comparison because, right, it's not like Lucy's idea is super original. We've seen it before in Limitless and other times before that, just like Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that is actually a pretty good comparison. They're both sort of thinking man's summer action movies, maybe.
But as you point out, though, Justin, it's also something that's trying to market more to mainstream.
Right.
Which works both for and against it.
Sadly.
Yeah, I agree.
If I can jump in on this argument, actually.
Go ahead.
I feel like Edge of Tomorrow, yes, it had a better story, but it also had a very well-rounded cast. Like, even Bill Paxton and his Marines, they're basically the most stereotypical military cliche, but they're generally fun to watch, and they do somewhat add to the story.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, I mean, even the guy is debating at one point, what am I doing here?
He's like, oh, what purpose do I serve?
The cop, you mean?
And she's
Yes, the cop she's running around with.
I thought it was interesting the reason she gave for him to be there, but you're right. He could have easily not been there.
I agree. Yeah,
I didn't mind him being there.
I don't think that Morgan Freeman was necessarily
I think he was-
disposable
I
like
think-
Justin did, but I mean,
Do you think he was bad? I didn't think he was
could have
bad.
developed
No,
his
he-
character a little bit
He did
more,
his
I
job.
guess.
It's just he was.
I liked his part. I agree his character was a little underdeveloped.
Yeah. No. He wasn't a bad character. I just wish they had found a better way to bring him in, other than okay, here are the deeper themes. Let's take like 2 minutes to explain them.
It's kind of a Nolan effect.
More or less, yes.
I'm sorry.
And by the way, Justin, you mentioned something in your review too that I really agree with. The shots of the animals, like in the beginning of the movie, and when Morgan Freeman is doing his speech to the
College
class or whatever that was.
Conference, I think.
Yeah,
it was.
some kind of conference. It was like beating you over the head. It was really annoying.
Like it's obvious what
That
you're
was
trying to say.
that was one of my least favorite parts of the movie by far.
And I agree, like, the mousetrap thing, like, when that random cut to that, like, part of me felt like that was kind of quirky, but that was also, like, I thought it was really too obvious.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like, it's almost like, it's just stuck out to you and took you out of the movie for a second.
It really does.
Like, maybe, I didn't mind it being done a couple times, but literally with that whole sequence, they kept doing it again and again, getting chased by
Yeah.
leopards. Like, we get it.
We got it.
Predators, we get it.
Right.
Or mating, or
There was no like real subtext for why these certain people were chosen to have the drugs placed inside them.
Right,
They were just sort of random,
I mean,
which,
I guess the drug empire could kidnap random people. I'm sure it's not something that hasn't happened in real
No,
life.
I guess. I just...
it also seems to be a bit of a Besson staple. It's like almost every single plot of his is sort of a need-to-know basis.
Mm-hmm. But that's a good point. He tends to have characters that we grow to know throughout the movie. You don't have a whole lot of backstory.
And we don't really find out too much. I mean, other than the phone call to her mother.
We got a good sense, though, I think, of the kind of person she was within that brief period of time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Like, there was enough, but I think that was probably due more to the acting and directing than the writing, if I had to guess.
No, I'd say it's a fair assessment. I feel like there could have been more there that would have really helped flesh out her character.
There was one little thing that kind of bugged me. I guess it is involved in characterization. It bugged me more at the beginning, But once we learned more about what they were going for and the kind of person she was becoming, it didn't really bother me as much. But I felt like she jumped. I mean, I guess she gets about, 20%, and immediately she, pretty much loses that moral connection.
Yeah, it was kind of quick.
Because I was like, okay, you gain a significant more of your brain power. I get that the closer she gets, maybe she understands things in a bigger light, and so human life doesn't seem quite as consequential. But still, right after she gets that jump, she starts killing, these gangsters. I was like, look, you gain more intelligence. It doesn't change your personality immediately. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and you're right. The shades of difference, between 20 and 50%.
I can control my body.
She was basically the same character.
There was no jump between 20 and 100.
Right. Well, once she got into 80 and 90, sure, but yeah, the first half of the film, I would say, she's exactly the same as soon as she goes to 20%.
She just gains more powers.
Right.
That was something that bugged me at first, but kind of got fizzled out as it went through.
Okay.
But that might have impacted it had they not explained it later on.
Well, I'm surprised that we're all in exact agreement. This seems to be a divisive film. Looking at the Rotten Tomatoes score, for example, and so I'm surprised that we all had the exact same grade on it.
It's a movie that has noticeable flaws, but there's so much good within it that it doesn't get bogged down by its own flaws.
I definitely enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, there are definitely issues, but I can't say that I didn't enjoy it and I admire it.
Well, we'll see how we feel about the next movie, if we're all in agreement with Hercules. Joe's going to tell us about that.
Hercules is the second film this year based on the mythological hero. It is directed by the infamous Brett Ratner and stars Dwayne Johnson as the titular hero, as well as some greats like Rufus Sewell, Ian McShane, and even John Hurt and Joseph Fiennes. This version finds Hercules sometime after accomplishing his labors, unfortunately, and his legend has grown. Working with a band of semi-heroic mercenaries, he and his companions are asked by an aging king, played by John Hurt, who asks him to come and aid his people to stop an invading horde. Hercules must train a group of inexperienced farmers and turn them into an army, while overcoming his own personal demons, specifically the murder of his family. Hercules is a very welcome breath of fresh air after the bastardization that came earlier this year. One thing that actually surprised me was that the cast actually was made up of some really good people. This really helped give this fairly cliché supporting characters some significant personality. Significantly, I think with Ian McShane really stood out to me. I thought he was hilarious. There's also some good dialogue, and one of the film's saving graces is the tongue-in-cheek humor and the sense of fun. You can tell there is some real inspiration from the 90s TV show. The strongest element here, though, is Johnson as the lead role. He's actually very convincing as the hero and is the most accurate portrayal of the character I've seen on film. I will admit he isn't the greatest actor, but I was genuinely impressed with him here. There is one aspect that I am somewhat torn on, though. This version alludes to the mythological elements while trying to add some realism, which is actually something that's never really been done before. This is applaudable, but also kind of frustrating, since I still want to actually see a Hercules movie about the main legend. Maybe one day. Still, this is probably the most accurate version I've seen so far. There are still some issues with the film, and while the action is fun, it does get tiresome after a while seeing Hercules hit the same guys with his club for the 50th time. Then there is the biggest issue for me. The main story is extremely generic, the twist is pretty obvious, and the stakes really aren't that high. That's just because the villains are, well, just guys, and Hercules is Hercules, so you don't feel like they have much of a chance. Still, I really like The Rock, and I like the side characters, the cheeky humor, and some of the minor plot elements. So I leave it with a C+.
Well, when talking about this film, it is hard to not compare it in some way to The Legend of Hercules from earlier this year.
Excrement.
Well, yes, it was a unanimous F on this show, which I think we've only gotten maybe 2 of this whole year, that and Vampire Academy.
Sabotage.
Oh, you're right, Sabotage, I'm sorry.
The Great
Sabotage. But this version of the story rates better in pretty much every aspect. Like Joe mentioned, it's more reverent to the original tale. Johnson is far superior to Kellen Lutz, both physically and in his acting ability and character performance. Visually, it's much more appealing. It makes it seem like Legend of Hercules is basically the direct-to-DVD bargain bin version of this movie.
I could agree with that.
Now, to be clear, that's not to say this film particularly excels in any of those aspects. It's just far better, by comparison to that train wreck. This version has a little bit of an identity crisis. It tries, I think, sometimes too hard for the comedy. The Ian McShane stuff I liked, but then it would sprinkle in other comedy that I just thought maybe didn't belong. And then at other parts, it's hilarious, but unintentionally so. And I think it's great that they want to be closer to the original legend, But as you said, Joe, you wanted to see
The actual legend.
the actual labors. All they do is mention the 12 labors over and over and over again. Every kid in every scene. Oh, mister, I loved your 12 labors. My favorite was when you did this. And I was like,
No.
okay. It's kind of tiresome. But in short, making a better Hercules doesn't mean they've necessarily made a good one. It just means it's not a failure like the other one. I leave Hercules with a C-.
Okay.
Not terrible, not great. Justin, what'd you think?
As two films have chosen to focus on the infamous Greek god, or demigod in the case of these two, I find myself going back and forth as to which one did it worse. The Legend of Hercules meant well but took itself far too seriously, and ultimately ripped off just about every decent swords and sandals movie of probably the last 8 years. Hercules, the latest disgusting excuse of a film from director Brett Ratner, just cares about being empty, fluffy summer fun, and not much else. Aside from the miscasting of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in the title role, and aside several others of the supporting cast are paper thin and at one point, in an attempt for pitiful comedy by the end, even questioning why some of their purpose is in the overall end product. Although Hercules does have a bigger budget than the last film, most of the action is shaky or just overall hard to watch, with predictable use of 3D being reduced to things flying dangerously close to the camera. However, the question remains as to why I cannot truly lop this one immediately in line with the other piece of garbage. Well, while I can't say I have any burning desire to rewatch this drivel, unlike The Legend of Hercules, I didn't quite find myself in the same mindset of clawing at my armrest to avoid walking out of the film, and although they are scarce, there were a few one-liners that kept the film from being a complete disaster. It's really what makes the 10% of my grading criteria being devoted to my own personal enjoyment that ends up with Hercules being left with a D.
Well, okay, you think The Rock was miscast?
Yes.
Why?
There's a difference between looking the part and being the part.
I thought he was pretty into it, Justin.
I think he was trying to be into it, but he doesn't have that kind of range. I didn't think he was that charismatic as he was trying to be. I think he was trying to have fun with it and not doing a really good job.
I thought he was having a great time with it. Rock always has a great time.
I got a comment. I mean, whether or not you think he was right for this particular role, or if you think he's a good actor or not, The Rock oozes charisma in every performance.
Disagree completely.
Whether it's
Why people
wrestling,
like him.
whether it's...
I thought he was like the best thing about Pain and Gain. Like I said, he's not the world's greatest actor, but he has range. You can fit him into different movies. It works.
The closest thing I've seen to have range in, and I don't know if either of you have seen this, Gridiron Gang.
Actually, I haven't, but
I haven't either.
still, I mean, I think that it's one of those things where you have to go into a certain mindset with this movie. It's supposed to be cheesy. It's supposed to be silly. And The Rock fits in very well with that. That's most of his movies. That's wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
That's his whole persona, generally.
Which is fine, but eventually you get to the point where you're half waiting for him to say, "Can you smell what the Herc is cooking?"
Yeah, I was thinking it. You know, it's fine. I just think that in terms of casting, you could have picked a lot worse people.
Oh,
than
absolutely.
The Rock. But this is another problem I have with your review. You think that The Legend of Hercules meant well?
I think so. I mean,
You think it
It
meant
was
well.
a piece of garbage.
honestly,
They didn't
it
know
is still
anything.
the one movie I was honestly trying to figure out how I could give it something other than an F.
It was horrible.
If it wasn't for the fact that it was basically ripping off everything, same reason I gave Pompeii an F, and I thought that was 10 times more shamelessly done.
Hercules was terrible. Or The
Look,
Legend of Hercules was terrible.
I think that at the very least you have some great actors in Hercules. I mean, they really uplift things. In The Legend of Hercules, there were pretty much nobodies. And even the people that were trying were so flat.
Yeah, you have Kit Harington and Kiefer Sutherland in Pompeii doesn't mean it's a good movie.
No, but I'm saying there were some pretty good cast members. I mean, you didn't like Ian McShane? You didn't think those jokes were funny? He was the standout
When he was
in the movie.
narrating and literally saying his character is completely useless.
He wasn't
No.
completely useless.
He was the comic relief of the film.
Yeah.
Some of the one-liners I was cool with. It's part of the reason I gave it a D.
I don't think a one-liner should really, bring your grade up from a fail. It sounds like you pretty
It's
much
trying
should
to
fail
have
it.
somewhat of a sense of humor, which I was okay with. The problem is, much like Dan, a lot of it is unintentionally hilarious.
Which I think is fine.
Not really. There's a big difference between shooting for straight-up comedy and trying to have a moment where you're trying to be serious and it just comes off as hilarious.
Well, that's true. I mean, that might be a failure, but I still thought that was entertaining. I mean, it's not a movie that's taking itself too seriously to begin with anyway. It really wasn't. I mean, you're right, there were some semi-dramatic moments that weren't done very well. I will admit they're one of the weaker elements, but I still thought it was interesting they tried to explore some of the darker aspects of his character. They kept it closer to the legend than the Legend of Hercules movie did. I mean,
even though the 12 labors is basically reduced to a highlight reel.
Yeah, that's true.
But
you know
well,
what?
and that bothered Joe as well.
It did bother me, but I still think they did something interesting with it. They implemented it more than The Legend of Hercules did. At least they showed us a little more of it. They tried a unique spin on it.
The problem with me is I'm okay with an actor looking like he's having fun. The problem is you need a director who's going to be able to bring that in and make a decent movie, which I don't think Ratner was the right man for the job for.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was actually going to be my next point. You really, really don't like Brett Ratner, and I wonder how much of that affected your viewing of the movie.
You were talking about that a lot beforehand, and I admit I'm not a huge fan of him either, but I think that it's probably one of his better movies in a while, to be honest with you. X-Men 3 was an atrocity, but it was still entertaining. And you could argue maybe that was better than this, but I still was able to go back and say, hey, I thought this was enjoyable. I mean, I will admit, maybe I saw it with a bunch of people. You were there, Dan. And I thought, hey, you get in the mood with the people. And everybody afterwards, when I was talking, loved this movie. And I even asked everybody. Everyone gave it like B's. Everyone really enjoyed this. So I think that for the audience that was looking for it, it was very satisfying.
Yeah, Cinema Score, which polls audience members on opening weekend with letter grades, they gave it a B+ average. So obviously audiences are connecting with this a little more than really any of us.
Yeah.
But,
that's what I mean.
Obviously I think they're having fun with it.
That's why I bumped mine up to a C+. Because, I mean, realistically, it might be more of a C. But this movie just seems to work so well for its audience. And it's just a fun movie. And I think if you're going into it with that mentality, it's fine. It's not great, but I think it's entertaining. And that's fine for me.
And my argument would be audiences deserve better. Do I loathe Brett Ratner? Yes, absolutely. I thought Tower Heist was a complete mess. I didn't like this. X-Men 3 speaks for itself. At the same time, though, it's still... He doesn't know how to direct his actors. He doesn't know how to shoot anything particularly well. All he seems to know how to do is make things fluffy and try and pander to the lowest brow audience he can possibly pander to.
It's a summer blockbuster.
If it succeeds, fantastic. I have nothing against it. But he will forever be missing the mark as far as I'm concerned.
You're right. He's not like the most innovative.
He's never going to hit that mark as far as I'm concerned sets up every one of his movies for a low grade. I don't know if you can say he's never going to hit the mark. He may eventually do something you like if you're open to it, I guess is my point.
I mean, I'd like to see that he's improved in some way, but he basically churns out the same thing the exact same way.
I don't think it's something that's supposed to be taken too seriously. And I don't think you're familiar at all with Kevin Sorbo's series, are you?
Not much that I can, have a full-blown conversation with.
Because you pointed out how you felt like it was kind of bad where in terms of them trying to be funny, I think it's a problem for you too, Dan, but also some of it was unintentionally funny. That's kind of how the TV series was. It's like, yes, there was some intentional humor, but some of it was just bad. But it kind of fuses together into something people really enjoy and still lives on. I don't know if this is quite as good as that, but, that kind of does create its own animal. So, and I really felt that they were definitely drawing some inspiration for that. As you guys know, I like that.
Sure.
And, so, I mean, I can kind of get into the spirit of kind of the corniness of it. Maybe stylistically still not the greatest, but I still felt the spirit was there. And that's still much closer to Hercules to me, which impacts my grade a lot.
Sure.
If I like a character, if I like a story, obviously you guys see this with Spider-Man and whatnot, that's a big part for me.
No, and I can respect that.
If it's a good adaptation. So, to me, yes, it's far from perfect, but it's much, much better than the other piece of garbage.
All right, well, let's move on to Planes, Fire, and Rescue. This takes place shortly after the first Planes, in which Dusty Crophopper, voiced again by Dane Cook, becomes an award-winning racing plane. But in Fire and Rescue, when his gearbox gets damaged and he learns that his particular style is no longer made and his racing days may be behind him, he goes on a secret flight to test his limits, in the process starting a rather large fire in his town. Though it gets put out, the town realizes they're not properly equipped to fight fires. Since Dusty can no longer race, he decides to help by getting certified as a firefighter by traveling to Piston Peak National Park, where he gets trained by a fire and rescue crew. Stacy Keach voices Skipper Riley, Dusty's mentor at the park, and Julie Bowen voices Lil Dipper, a fan and love interest of Dusty's. Whereas the first Planes film was essentially a slap in the face to the Cars series that Pixar created, with Fire and Rescue, the Planes series moves away from the merely a Cars ripoff territory and actually breathes some life into the franchise. Now, visually, it's nothing amazing, and the mostly unimpressive voice acting from the first film remains, but the story is fairly engaging, and I think kids still in the single-digit age range will probably enjoy it. It won't be the most exciting for parents, But there is more humor for them this time around, like an 80s cop show spoof and loads of travel-related puns that will go over kids' heads, like the celebrity Boat Reynolds. Fire and Rescue gets a C. Joe, what do you think? Now, you didn't see the first one.
No. Well, I will start off by saying that, in general, the whole Cars thing, I'm not very happy about it. I don't think it's very creative. I never really particularly enjoyed it.
Including the original Cars film.
I mean, even Cars, I still think it's pretty much the lowest thing that Pixar ever did. But even so, I just don't like the whole franchise. And I didn't see the first Planes, but everything you guys said about it pretty much painted this bad picture.
Yeah.
So I really wasn't excited about seeing this one. When I sat down, I didn't hate it as much as I thought it was going to. I think the thing that actually held my attention the most of this movie was I actually thought the story was decent.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was okay. I actually kind of liked the whole guy, he's up on the top and he gets brought down, kind of the fish out of water story, or I guess a plane out of air story, or off a racetrack world.
Plane out of the hangar story.
Plane out of the hangar story. I liked some of the jokes. I thought some of the voice acting was decent. I thought some of the side people were pretty forgettable, but there were some voices I recognized. And I thought the animation was decent. I liked some of the music. I thought it was okay. I give it a C as well.
Okay. Yeah, listen, if nothing else, maybe it'll introduce kids to AC/DC.
Yeah, which I don't know.
Nothing wrong with that.
That was a good segment in the film.
I thought it was
Thunderstruck.
Yeah, that's actually one of the music numbers that stuck out the most to me. Yeah. I did also think kids would really like this, like little ones. I thought they'd get a kick out of it. It's got enough going on.
Well, Justin, let's go to you. You and I both gave the first Planes a D, so I'm curious to see how the second one grabbed you.
In a way, the world of Cars has become the Disney equivalent of an annual offering from Adam Sandler. Both started out with noble intents that won people over, but now the thought of another being released is generally met with the majority groaning and asking themselves, why? There's a cult following in both that keeps them alive, but ultimately the end result is mediocre at best. Although there are many problems with Planes, Fire and Rescue, I have to at least give it partial credit for being such a step up from the atrocity that was the original film. Although it's nothing groundbreaking in terms of story or acting, at least the sequel did not shamelessly rip off its story from another film literally set in the same universe. Mm-hmm. Some of the new additions to the voice cast, like Ed Harris and Julie Bowen, are entertaining, and while still not fantastic, the animation is a slight step up from the pitifully obvious direct-to-DVD quality that the original film had. As a whole, the Planes franchise still largely underwhelms, but at least it's heading in a slightly better direction, and I give it a C-.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely a step up. I mean, the biggest insult with the first Planes was...
It's the same plot for Cars.
Yeah, I mean, he is in a race, and then, it's like... And then the old plane helps him out. It's like, that literally is Cars. So, yes, that was beyond frustrating with the first film. But I thought... Yeah, I mean, this has a pretty good plot, and although it's a bit heavy-handed in its message of the, hey kids, firemen, are heroes and everything, but they are, so it's,
I can't really say they're wrong.
Yeah, it's like, well, I just, it's a bit in your face with the,
you know what? It's no worse than some of the cartoons you probably watched as a kid.
Yeah, that's probably true.
He-Man says, "Be good to the firemen," because
well, that's true. I guess all the cartoons I watched in the '80s, right, had that like
little message at the end.
The little bumper message, G.I. Joe
PSA.
and He-Man.
Even in the '90s, they had some of that, right, Justin?
Actually, Power Rangers had a lot of it.
Yep, the lesson for the day.
You're right. I guess I can't say it's any more in your face than that.
Yeah, I say there. I mean, it's not wrong. I thought it was kind of cool to have a fireman movie for kids. They can appreciate something cool. Maybe the kid will grow up and be a fireman because of Planes. We don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly possible.
Something good.
There's been more inspiration.
Yeah.
And I will give them this. They actually did some research into the history of firefighting and whatnot, and apparently crop duster planes were used,
I have to admit,
in this manner.
I do think that was interesting.
So, I mean, they put a little bit more effort into
Somebody
this.
looked into
I
the
wish
script.
there had been more of that in this, actually. Like, how do you fight fires and things like that?
Well, I mean, I don't think it needs to be, an educational movie per se, but I think it's pretty cool that there are some nods to realism, with this film that, I certainly didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's a trailer that delivers.
That's true.
Yeah, pretty much is straightforward.
That trailer did say exactly what was going to happen.
How do you guys feel about Dipper, by the way? Because I thought she was creepy.
A little creepy.
But I didn't mind her by the end. I thought she was okay.
I thought it was a little much. They went to her a lot with the, stalking bit.
Was that appropriate for kids? Because I kind of felt like there was a little bit of, maybe kids wouldn't get that. But
Yeah, I think that was more for the parents.
Yeah.
I don't know if...
it was appropriate, though.
I don't know if kids would necessarily pick up on the fact that she's being a little bit of a creep. I think they just see her as, like, a fan of his and...
More or less.
I'm not sure.
You don't think?
That there was an element there. I mean, some kids are smarter than you give them credit for.
Well, I don't know. I feel like the target age range really is the single-digit kids. I don't think an 8-year-old's necessarily going to pick up that, wow, she's a creep.
You might be surprised, though.
Maybe. But at least it was a better film. Don't ever watch The First Planes, Joe. You don't need to.
I didn't want to.
Yeah, you've seen the better one, and now this is a trilogy, so there's a third one coming out next year. Justin mentioned it's the old annual tradition now.
I don't know
if
it really speaks to the franchise as a whole, but I didn't really feel like I needed to see the first one to get this one at all. I picked up, immediately.
Everything you needed to know they told you in the first 10 minutes, so...
Yeah.
All right, well, next film is Wish I Was Here, and we touched on this one very briefly when we talked about Kickstarter. This is a film that was funded entirely by Kickstarter, and Joe's going to tell us about Wish I Was Here.
It is a Kickstarter-funded comedy/drama film directed by Zach Braff and starring Braff as Aidan Bloom and Kate Hudson as his wife Sarah. This film finds Bloom as a 35-year-old struggling actor, father, and husband who is still trying to figure out his purpose in life. After having to start homeschooling his children, Aidan begins to learn more about himself through his kids. Meanwhile, he also has to contend with his slacker brother, his wife being sexually harassed, and his difficult father being diagnosed with cancer. This movie is basically what everyone says it is, both a spiritual sequel and sort of a retread of Garden State. Some of the comedy does work, though some of it may be a bit quirky and on the nose for some, and a bit strained at that. The tone has also been uneven, with some narratives being jumbled around so that they seem somewhat underdeveloped, most notably with the storyline with Bloom's brother. However, thematically, the movie does focus on some universal ideas, though certainly not unexplored midlife crisis elements. The characters are mostly likable, and the drama actually works pretty well for the most part, most satisfyingly in regard to the relationship with Bloom's father. This one is certainly not as balanced or focused as Garden State, but it is fairly entertaining and has a really heartfelt story, and I give it a B.
All right, Justin, what did you think of Wish I Was Here?
The year 2014, at least director-wise, is starting to become a year in which promising filmmakers seem to be forgetting large portions of what made some of their earlier, much better material great. I firmly believe that director Jim Carney missed the mark with following up his groundbreaking musical Once with the mainstream nature of Begin Again, and while Wish I Was Here did not quite underwhelm me in the same way, it skirts around the poignant heart with humor in a tragic situation that made Garden State what it was. Controversy with Kickstarter aside, the general storyline has moments where it works beautifully and others that merely feel underdeveloped. Braff seems to be approaching his character within the same vein as Garden State, but doesn't seem to grasp the concept that his prior film came out roughly a decade ago, and so an angst-ridden man in his late 30s with heavy-handed metaphors for his desperate attempts to hold on to his youth seem a little less believable. However, this gets improved upon as the audience goes through his character, particularly with his brother and father, who could never seem further apart. It's definitely not without flaws, but for those moments and some decent acting, I give Wish I Was Here a B.
Well, for me, this one was definitely a mixed bag. The jokes have this, sitcom-y, one-liner sensibility that doesn't usually work, except for scenes where the children are involved. Pierce Gagnon as son Tucker, to me, was the breakout of the film. He was very funny, but largely the comedy interrupts the most heartfelt moments of the film. I'm all for a good mix of comedy and drama, as is life, but it just seemed to be so forced here that I thought it affected some of the best scenes of the film. Mandy Patinkin gives an outstanding performance as Braff's father, and even Kate Hudson isn't too bad, which I can't say too often, although she has no chemistry with Braff. Her best scenes were either with the kids or with Patinkin. But Josh Gad, one of my favorite up-and-comers, as we've discussed before on the show, just seems like he's not quite sure how to play his part, what his motivation is. I could have done without all the montages set to the indie music as well. Despite all this, though, I can't say it's a bad film. I kind of enjoyed it. I just think it's a film with overdone premises, and I give it a C+.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie that feels like it could have been a lot better.
I agree.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if that's because he was relying too heavily on Garden State's staples, or if he should have veered, if he should have...
Honestly, the thing about it is, it felt like it had a lot of the quirkiness from Garden State, but it just wasn't integrated very well. See, the thing about Garden State was, it's really more of a drama than a comedy. I mean, the first 45 minutes of the movie are just depressing. Mm-hmm. And then it slowly builds up with the comedy, and by the end it's kind of more heartfelt. It's a transition. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one, it's like, we have drama, oh, we have a joke, drama, joke. I mean, there was one that was really bad, where the scene with the brother where he's like... he has his little character arc where he gets with the girl at the end, right. And then immediately following that, it's this really heartfelt scene. You're like, he was just doing this right before then. That kind
But then even in that heartfelt scene, he's still wearing his ridiculous Comic-Con outfit to try and punch the joke, and it's like...
Well, it's kind of like, obviously this nerdy guy's not grown up, and that's part of the big issue with both these films is growing up and not being like, your childhood, etc., which is fine. That's kind of Braff's thing. It's just that it was a little overdone here. Like, okay, do you get the fact that, oh yeah, we're kids, like, oh, he's a blogger, and he's like, oh, he knows everything about this, and I thought there were also some kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily an homage. I mean, I know obviously Braff and his brother wrote it, so it can't be making too much fun of geek culture, but I felt like it kind of was too. And I
don't know. I thought it was okay. I mean, I've never been to Comic-Con, so I can't speak to that. But
I thought it was cool that like they were doing the costuming, but at the same time, I just felt like it was that particular scene just bugged me. The one I just talked about, because I thought it really was very distracting from the drama.
Yes, I do too, and that's sort of the forced comedy stuff.
In defense, though, I felt like that entire bit with the whole Comic-Con subplot, I felt like it was underdeveloped. So I keep going back and forth as to whether or not it was an unnecessary scene, or should they have just expanded on that so that we could have gotten more into it.
It's just that in regards to the brother's story arc, he was a very underdeveloped character. If they had spent a little more time balancing that, fleshing that out, it would have been fine. I thought he was interesting, but I felt like by the end of the movie, we barely knew him.
Does it seem like it would be in his character to be with this woman that he meets and pick up the phone from his family, which he doesn't really like, in the middle of the act?
Yeah, that was a bit odd.
Like...
That's my
that
big...
doesn't seem like...
Honestly, that whole scene was...
logical.
For a number of reasons, that was my least favorite scene in the whole movie. Mm-hmm. That really was. There were things wrong with it, for sure.
They had given her more to do. I felt like that could have been at least partially justified.
But it wasn't. It was like, okay, I met her, and I met her because she gave me attitude?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't get it. I don't know.
She was wearing a costume, so she gets him.
Because they're both in a costume.
They have stuff in common.
Right, because obviously people that make costumes will automatically be friends, right?
That's right.
Like I usually
that's exactly right, Joe.
I mean, if you know anything about that stuff, know a little. They're usually very competitive.
Right. I was going to say, isn't cosplay pretty fierce?
Like, unless you're friends with the person.
Especially since he won.
Yeah,
she probably would not have been too happy with him.
Realistically, more than likely, she wouldn't be admiring. She'd be like, that fat,
yeah. Exactly.
I mean, I don't know what it is about Zach Braff. I think that his comedy's decent. Like, I laughed quite a bit. But I feel like he's just so much stronger doing the drama. Like, my favorite part of Garden State was the drama. My favorite part of this movie was the drama.
Certainly in his writing, yes. I don't know if I can say that for his acting.
No, but, like, the films
themselves. But his writing,
yeah. And in terms of direction.
And directing,
right.
Yes. I would agree with
him
that.
As an individual, no. But, I mean, the scenes with Kate Hudson and the dad, I mean...
I thought that was a really good scene.
There were some really intense moments. I got teary. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I thought it worked,
There's a time and a place, and I don't think he's quite mastered that yet.
Yeah, that sounds
pretty
accurate.
I would agree with that.
That's a pretty accurate statement.
I mean, in Garden State, I felt like there were quirky moments, but they tied in really well with the narrative.
And the drama. And, I mean, I felt the overall payoff was still drama. It was like, payoff with dad.
Right.
Another theme in both these films. Like, gotta get over this, the depression, the pills. I mean, the end of the Garden State's pretty intense. I mean, like,
it is.
I'm sorry, when I think about Garden State... I do think about the comedy a little bit, but really the bulk of the movie is drama,
right?
Which is fine. I mean, I like
that's what I think everybody remembers from that movie.
It's a great. I think it's
that's the takeaway.
It's a great drama with some quirky comedy, but it's a drama in my mind. I think Zach Braff thinks he's a comedian maybe because of Scrubs. I think he should focus on drama.
Yeah, he's a better dramatic filmmaker than he is a comedy. All right, well, let's move on to our home media moment for this week, and that is Grand Piano. Justin's going to tell us about that.
After a disastrous attempt to perform La Cinquette, commonly referred to as the unplayable piece, Renowned pianist Tom Selznick, played by Elijah Wood, returns after 5 years to try his hand again using the piano of his mentor, Patrick Goderow. However, as he begins his performance, Tom discovers disturbing messages on his sheet music, threatening to kill him if he plays one wrong note, being orchestrated by an unseen sniper, played by John Cusack, that he can only hear through an earpiece.
Joe's already laughing.
That synopsis is just so hilarious when you think about it.
While I can't really call Grand Piano original, I can say roughly 2/3 of the movie does what it set out to do relatively well. The scenario I thought was relatively suspenseful, both leads give adequate performances, and there are some surprisingly good shots. Unfortunately, that still leaves the last third, which truly serves as the reason this grade couldn't be much higher. As the film goes on, the reasoning behind the situation gets progressively more and more ridiculous. Although the running time doesn't make it drag during these moments, it continues to take the audience out of the story, culminating in a finale that just ends up being melodramatic and silly. It's not quite enough to give Grand Piano a failing grade, but it does pull down what would have probably been a C all the way down to a D+.
Well, when we decided to run this one for an HMM, and I read the synopsis for it, it sounded interesting, but I have to admit I wondered if the plot could sustain itself for 90 minutes. I mean, the bulk of this movie does take place at one concert, and specifically during one or two pieces of music. The truth is, it actually does move pretty swiftly, though once you shave off the opening and ridiculously long closing credits, it's really less than 75 minutes. I don't know why the closing credits were like 15 minutes. It was ridiculous. But anyway, the problem with the movie lies in the massive plot holes in the story and a questionable motive from the antagonist. It's a near laughable performance from Cusack to begin with, but I think Wood keeps the movie afloat. It's not Hitchcock, certainly, but you could do worse to kill a little over an hour, and I give it a C. But Joe, your laughter during Justin's synopsis tells me that you did not care for this movie.
I wouldn't say that.
Let's hear about it.
Well, there's a bit of a story. Well, it was late, and so I decided to watch this film because, I mean, obviously, it was the last film I had to watch on the docket. So I said, hey, sounds intriguing, and I will admit, I really liked the premise. I thought it was really cool. I liked Elijah Wood's character. I agree with Justin. There were some really good shots. And the music, of course, was fantastic. Got some good classical music. Cool setup. It does have a little bit of a Hitchcock flair. But the problem is, once you actually get into the plot, it immediately becomes really silly. I mean, it's so elaborate. I mean, it goes beyond some of the most, ridiculous comic book villainy. Just, literally him, putting messages in each page, and it seemed to predict every single motion, how far ahead Elijah would read between movements.
Yeah, that is
and then
true.
Being able to go back and start at the beginning. He must be a super genius to be able to predict everything about Elijah Wood to such fine detail. And that little touch that it's in little red marker. Mm-hmm. The super psychopath. I mean, I don't know. I mean, admittedly, yes, Elijah Wood does hold it up. The movie is outrageous. It's so awesomely bad. I mean, that's what this means. I mean, John Cusack's fine, I guess.
He's terrible.
I was okay with him.
He was okay. His voiceover was fine. I mean, it's standard Cusack.
Yeah, it is anymore.
It's not bad. It's just kind of there.
Yeah.
He's there.
Contrast to last year's The Factory.
He's playing
leaps and bounds.
a psycho. Yeah, it's fine. I actually felt like it was reminiscent of Phone Booth, just instead of being in a phone booth, it was actually in an opera house.
That makes sense.
Very similar innovations, the sniper element. So I can get behind that kind of silliness. But the problem is this. Even though I did find it kind of intriguing, it just kept getting so repetitive. Go back, fire
Right.
again. Ooh, I can fire again. It just there wasn't so much you really could stretch it out for that 75-minute length. And the thing is, I kind of fell asleep.
Really?
And then I sort of woke up, and I guess I didn't fall asleep that long because I was just kind of lying there for minutes. And there's this classical music, wow, Elijah Wood's been playing that for a long time. And then I realized it was the credits. I've been listening to the credits for about 5 minutes. Or 10 minutes. Literally, I thought I lost track of time. I actually did get to about the end of the movie, dozed off at the credits, and the credits were still going.
Yeah.
I can't even explain how. I was like, what?
I know.
I just thought the whole movie is silly.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible, but it is awesomely bad, and that's why I give it a C-. It's fun.
I'm with you.
It's fun.
It's
definitely
ridiculous.
Elijah Wood's good. He's enjoying it. It's a ridiculous premise. It's stupid. but it's so outrageous. I can't really say I didn't kind of enjoy it. So it's bad, but it's in that awesome.
I feel like you have to kind of have fun with this movie.
It was fun, but it was terrible.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
But it's fine. It's fine. It's that awesomely bad area, you know.
Yeah,
it's
it's definitely guilty pleasure. Status.
Absolutely.
You know?
I mean, it's a cool, like a really cool concept, just executed in the most hammy, over the top, ridiculous way. But it's enjoyable. So
and I still don't fully understand his motivation. I get it, but it's so like
I don't get it. I mean, I understand what it is, but I don't get it.
Yeah, like why would a person spend that much resolve
obsessive
to try and I guess.
But that's what I'm saying. It's we're going comic book level here. Like this is like
it is.
Johnny Quest.
It is. It's very comic book villainy.
Like it's just
you're right.
I have. If you play one single note wrong, I'll destroy you. Oh, you off key just a bit. I'll murder your wife. It's like the most over the top anime I've ever seen or something.
Now the question though is, do you think this movie knows?
No.
I don't either.
No, which is part of what makes it work. You can tell these people thought they were making a great movie.
Like Rock of Ages was very tongue-in-cheek and was trying to be stupid.
Yes.
And boy, it hit the mark. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
And Justin and I both gave that a really horrible grade.
But that's different. If you set out to make a dumb movie, it doesn't work.
I agree. That's what I mean.
If you try really hard and you put heart and soul into it and it's bad.
They really wanted this to be a big thriller, you know.
And that's my stance on it. Even if it doesn't work, if they put effort into it and there's heart, you can never fail that movie. If there's something enjoyable about it, like that, if there's some love, there is such a sense of fun. It's like it just works. It's one of those few exceptions where it goes beyond the logic.
I would definitely watch it again.
Oh yeah, I would totally watch it again.
I have an hour to kill sometimes.
You're right. It was short. I'd throw it on. Like you could watch it with some friends. It's fun to laugh at.
Yeah,
I'm not against it.
You could probably watch it 5 times in one night.
Exactly.
I'd watch it again, and we can listen to the music afterwards. You know, it's like a good dinner theme.
That is true.
Like seriously, I was
credits,
like,
I couldn't.
I thought that like I had missed the movie, but it was like 10 minutes of credits.
It sure was.
It's like, okay, I get you're trying to be classical opera, but I don't think even most movements are that long.
Yeah, it was a little much. I did like the shots though, because obviously that was not Elijah Wood playing the piano.
No, the cinematography was really good.
So yeah, I do have to give them credit there.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to our top 5, and in honor of Lucy, this week we've got the top 5 coolest movie drugs.
Ooh.
So I'll go first with this one. You know, we can all interpret this as we wish. I sort of picked a top 5 that are drugs that I find maybe could be useful, maybe would like to try, in that kind of vein, or just think the concept is cool.
Okay.
So that's sort of where I am with my top 5. My number 5 is Slow-Mo from Dread. I'm not sure if this is one I would try or not, but it's certainly an awesome concept. Everything, your brain goes about 100 times faster, and everything else goes about 100 times slower. So, I don't know. I could see trying it. We didn't really get a huge, side effect issue in the movie, did we? I mean, it didn't seem like...
Well, it's a drug. It kills you eventually.
Well, it kills you, but every drug kills you eventually.
That's the only side effect, really.
So, I could see maybe trying that if that was a real thing. I don't know. I'm not a druggie, so...
The most controversial podcast so far.
I know. All right, number 4, HFS from 21 Jump Street. This is one I maybe could try. It seems cool. I mean, I've never tried any sort of like hallucinogenic or anything, but I don't know. This might be one to try since you had to go through the 5 different stages. And again, as long as you don't do too much of it. Number 3 is more of a resourceful drug, and that is, well, it's sort of 2 different drugs from the Harry Potter world. One is Dittany from the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, to instantly heal the wounds, and the other one from Chamber of Secrets is the Skelegro, which heals up your limbs.
Painfully, though.
Painfully, but at least it heals them.
Medical drugs.
Yeah, medical drugs. My number 2 is also a medical drug, and that is ALZ-112 from Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Oh. I think it's fair to say that in this day and age, just about everyone either has a relative or knows somebody that has a relative that Alzheimer's affects. This could be a very helpful drug if it were on the market, so I give that my number 2.
Wow, that's interesting.
Joe,
All right.
let's hear from you on the top 5.
I guess I tried to do the movie drugs to me that just kind of stood out. There's a bit of a difference between all of them. Number 5 is Prosium from Equilibrium. This is basically a powerful suppressant that suppresses all emotions, and it basically keeps a whole society enslaved in this dystopian nightmare. So it's kind of the opposite effect most drugs have, usually enhancing an emotion. This one keeps everything down.
I don't think I'm familiar with that movie.
You're not?
No, what's it called?
Equilibrium?
No, I don't
Christian
know.
Bale, guns.
I think it was direct to DVD at the time, so I can't really fault you for that
Oh,
one.
It's
yeah,
kinda-
that's news to me.
It's kind of got a big
It's
following.
got a cult following, but I mean, everyone basically called it a Matrix ripoff.
Well,
Oh, okay.
it's with the coats and...
No, I got you now. Okay.
It's really not a Matrix ripoff. I mean, it's kind of different in a lot of ways. Do you think it's a Matrix ripoff, Justin?
I'm just telling you what the
I was going to say, that's the thing that got me to know what it was, so...
Yeah.
It's not.
I guess
though.
that is the general consensus, but...
If that's the case, in any case, yes. But that's Equilibrium. That's my number 5. Number 4 is one that Justin and I mentioned, and that's Nuke from RoboCop 2. I mean, this is basically a drug that's so addictive that it's destroying the entire city. Even the main bad guy of the movie actually quotes to RoboCop when he's pretty much beating him down. I didn't beat you, this did. So the drug is actually the antagonist of the film. Pretty
That's
much.
pretty cool.
It's a big, anti-drug message, obviously. A little heavy-handed, but it really is like the anti-war drug movie of the late 80s, early 90s. Number 3 is HFS from 21 Jump Street. I mean, this is also super addictive and deadly, but it has some of the most outrageous highs when you get to that point. So,
Seems pretty cool.
I mean, it's pretty awesome. This is just one of those drugs that's very memorable. And number 2 is
Slow-mo.
Slow-mo from Dread. I mean, it's just, if for nothing else, this drug brought some of the coolest visuals to 3D I've ever
Absolutely.
seen. I mean, I can't mention it. It's so awesome. It looks so awesome. I mean, it's one of the few times I can say doing drugs looks awesome. Sorry, kids.
True.
This is just the movie that makes it seem that way.
Yeah.
And once again, the drug is the enemy.
That's true as well. Yeah. Justin, how about you for the top 5 coolest movie drugs?
Another RoboCop Dread comparison.
Okay.
It's true.
Well, I'd like to begin with an honorable mention. The squid recordings from Strange Days. Now, while these aren't necessarily drugs, the way the recordings are administered through the cerebral cortex on a thing that latches onto your head called the superconducting quantum interference device, or SQUID, it sort of produces this sort of euphoric sensation, causing people to get addicted, such as the case with Ray Fiennes' character. But obviously not necessarily a drug, so I didn't think it was appropriate.
All right.
Number 5, Substance D, A Scanner Darkly.
I thought about putting that one on my list.
For anyone
I
who's
would not like to try that.
Well, it's kind of a horrible drug.
Well, I know. That's why it's not on my list.
No, actually, it's a good choice. I really considered putting it on, but I kind of felt like it served the same purpose as Nuke, which is why I left it off. But go ahead.
For anyone who's unfamiliar with Substance D, or not familiar with Scanner Darkly, which didn't have a whole lot of play in theaters, Substance D basically works with, once it's consumed, the two hemispheres of your brain compete with each other to produce these kind of strange, surrealistic images in front of you. And as far as I'm concerned, if it resembles anything like the general look of this film, which I really like the cell shading, rotoscoping, I'm kind of intrigued. Number 4, Slow-mo Dread. I think you guys said it best. The whole look of it is awesome. I do think it would get kind of repetitive, which is why it's so low on my list.
Not if you're on
Well,
it,
you
I
just do
imagine.
it once.
or just have
Just
one
to have the
for it.
experience.
You'll have it all day.
Yeah.
The pro drugs.
Yeah, I'm not saying do drugs. I'm just saying.
No, let's make that abundantly clear. Number 3, Clarity, Minority Report. Basically kind of serves the same purpose as the squid recordings. Is injected through a mouth device. Sort of gives a feeling of euphoria, or just sort of relaxes you. I could see that being very effective, since Tom Cruise's character is incredibly haunted throughout the duration of the film, that he's almost relying on it for at least the first half of the movie. And number 2, NZT Limitless. I feel like this is basically the same drug as in Lucy, but I feel like it's a bit more efficient. It doesn't necessarily last as long as in Lucy, but I feel like it's a lot more stable. And I feel like being able to access the full-blown 100% just for even short bursts would be really effective, despite expenses, which they make reference to constantly throughout that film.
Well, I mean, drugs are expensive in general, so.
Yeah.
If they're any good.
This is true, and certainly some of the ones we've mentioned I think would be very expensive. Well, my number one is NZT-48 from Limitless. Same thing as Lucy. You're right in that it opens 100% of your brain, but I think it does it in a more controlled way. And by the end of the film, they've worked out the kinks and the bugs so that it actually doesn't necessarily kill you if you stop using it. So, yeah, I think that would be very cool to take. Joe, what's your number one?
The Spice Melange from Dune. It expands your consciousness and heightens senses to a point that enough to allow you to see into the future and even bend space and time. It's basically the main plot point of the entire movie and book series, and it's the most sought-after drug in the galaxy. And as the main villain said, he who controls the spice controls the universe.
Wow, that does sound interesting.
It is.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Justin?
My number one is Lot 6 from Firestarter. Various people are assigned to this medical study and are administered this experimental drug and end up having these incredible abilities. Obviously, with Drew Barrymore's character, who is the child of two of the applicants and gains the ability to control fire. Her dad, who's the other main character of the film, has telepathy. We don't quite hear from who else has taken it and who has the abilities, but it'd be curious to see what would happen with that and how far it goes and how far it expands.
Make your own X-Man.
Basically, yeah. What's not to love?
Well, let's move on now to our triple feature of older films. That's our new classic, American Hustle, old classic, Justin's choice for this month, Brick, and our Oscar A to Z nominated film, and that's American History X this week. And our new classic is American Hustle. We ran this one for New Classic this week because if we were to include it in our Oscar A to Z, this is about the time we would be running it. It would actually be right after American History X.
Because Justin wouldn't stop talking about it.
Yeah, Justin kept thinking we were going to do it on the Oscars, but that's...
I got confused, jeez.
Well, now you got it, so it worked out.
Yeah, now you got to say it again. We're only covering the first 85 years of the Academy Awards, which leads us up to basically the time that the show started, Film Fanatics. So this one doesn't quite make the cut, but it was nominated for 10 awards overall, including the Big Seven, Picture, Director, all 4 acting categories, and Screenplay. It, however, went home empty-handed. Now, we reviewed it in full at the end of last year, so I'll just give a brief synopsis. It takes place in the late 70s and is loosely based on the U.S. government's abscam operation. Irving Rosenfeld and Sidney Prosser, a con artist, and his mistress, played by Christian Bale and Amy Adams, get busted by FBI agent Richie DeMasso, played by Bradley Cooper. He gives them a deal that he'll let them go if they help him bust government officials through sting operations, which they do starting with Mayor Carmine Polito, played by Jeremy Renner. Jennifer Lawrence also stars as Irving's wife. Directed by David O. Russell, this is a film that I almost can't say enough about. It was one of my favorite films of the year, landing in my top 10, and continued Russell's streak of A-range movies for me, starting with The Fighter and Silver Linings Playbook. I think what makes Russell such a gifted director isn't just that every little detail is carefully selected and that he captures the mood and tone of his film's time periods, but more than possibly any other up-and-coming director, he gets his actors and actresses to really push themselves to the limits of what they can do. It's why 2 actors from The Fighter, including Bale, earned Oscars, and why Silver Linings Playbook and this film are the only movies in the last 30 years to earn nominations in all 4 acting categories. Louis C.K. adds the perfect amount of humor as Richie's FBI boss, and there is also some laughs from Lawrence and Cooper specifically, but this is not to undermine the drama in any way, shape, or form. I think Zach Braff could easily take a cue from Russell on how to properly weave intense drama with some comedic elements. I think American Hustle could have been easily made in the classic 70s era of films. It certainly dresses the part, and the soundtrack is absolutely pitch perfect. I have to say, we mentioned this on the show when we originally talked about it, the strongest of the actors here is Adams, and maybe if we say it on every show, it will happen someday, give the girl an Oscar.
It's really about time.
Yeah.
There are a couple of little weird quirks I could possibly do without, but upon my 3rd viewing of this film for the new classic, I now give American Hustle an A+. Now, you guys did not like this film quite as much as I did. It was in neither of your top 20s at the end of the year, so let's hear from you guys how a second viewing of the movie grabbed you. Justin, let's start with you.
If there was ever a film from last year that could benefit from reflection, it would probably be American Hustle. Although I believe my arguments about too much focus on every single character, and I still personally find the extreme zoom-ins annoying, it's still very well put together as an homage to the stylistic nature of Martin Scorsese, while still fusing with some of the tricks of director David O. Russell as well. The characters are as strong as they were the first time round, and the overall look of the 70s is absolutely perfect, and possibly robbed of an Oscar win. Despite the plethora of character focus, the sharp writing manages to keep the audience both entertained and horrified that some of which is portrayed, as the opening title card suggests, actually happened. How much of it is real will probably never be known, but then again, that would defeat the quote-unquote hustle that makes this film so great. And I bumped my grade from last year's B+ to an A-.
Nice. All right, Joe, what'd you think?
It's terrible.
D. You moved it down to a D.
Yeah, it's a master jump. No, actually, I kind of agree. It's one of those movies that I think upon reflection, it actually does hold up well. The thing I really love about American Hustle, and the thing that continues to hold it up for me, I think it really speaks to Russell's just directing. His relationship with his actors, I think, is one of his best. And I think that's why people feel that he stands out more among directors these days. He knows how to use his cast well, and in correlation with that, there are some really well-written characters here. They're very interesting, they're dynamic, they're believable, and they have great dialogue, interpersonal. Everybody has great back and forth between each other in every scene. It's really awesome. There's also a lot of great costume design. I love the sets, I love the music. There's definitely more of a speak to the 70s feel. I don't know if it's completely genuine as it could be, but it's definitely a good homage. I still feel like the epic nature of the film doesn't quite match the story, which I still don't think is quite that amazing. I think it's a decent caper, but I've seen better, honestly. That's the only thing that really holds it down for me, but I think that the reason I didn't like it quite as much originally is because I did have my hopes set really high, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting. Maybe I expected something more that was directly like Scorsese, as opposed to kind of a fun homage. But taking that into account, I also bumped my grade up a little bit to an A-.
Nice. Well, and I will say this. When we first reviewed this on the show, we literally got out of the theater, and within a half hour, we're recording. So that was our very, very first initial feelings on the movie. And before we even did our top 20 of the year just a couple weeks later, I had already seen it a second time in theaters. So I think maybe that helped me a little bit.
I feel like it's something that the more you watch, you might get to appreciate what they were doing more.
Yeah, because I feel like I may have given it an A-. I'd have to go back and listen to that first show when we talked about it, but I may have given it an A- when we first talked about it.
American Hustle, I think, is one of those things that people were kind of in agreement with me, though. I did hear some people really liked it, but I feel like a lot of people were expecting something, and they got something else, and that might have affected their perceptions of it.
Which basically sums up every single David O. Russell movie ever made.
That might be a fair assessment.
I think the previews pretty much described what the movie would be like. Well, maybe not the initial the teaser trailer, but I don't know if people weren't happy with...
People seen a bit...
Because they expected something else. I just think maybe they...
I feel, personally, for me, it was a little underwhelming. I don't know if I could pin it down exactly. Maybe I just feel like the story wasn't quite that good.
You know, it's funny. I've heard a lot of people say that same thing about Argo, which won Best Picture the year previous, and we'll be watching actually for the Oscar A to Z in the next couple of months, that they were really expecting this super grand story, and that basic quote that you said, the epic nature of the film...
Doesn't really match the
plot.
Doesn't
really match the story itself. I've heard that said about Argo by several different people.
It's down to earth.
Yeah, which I didn't find that to be the case with Argo either. I gave that an A+ as well. But, I guess I can see where people are coming from with that.
Well, the plot of Argo, I think, in and of itself, is a more intense plot. So, I don't know...
Certainly the stakes are higher.
The stakes are higher, yeah. This is more of like kind of a fun...
But I think this is more of a character piece than Argo was.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, we don't get a huge sense of character there other than maybe Ben Affleck and possibly Bryan Cranston.
And that's what I'm saying. The strongest thing is the characters. I just feel the plot wasn't as good as the characters.
Okay.
I feel like the characters deserve to be in a slightly elevated plot. And that was my issue with it. Maybe they could have expanded on more things, maybe made it a little more complex. I don't know. I just felt like the characterization and the style didn't quite match the story.
Okay.
Not saying it's bad. I mean, it's actually very good. The stylistic nature and characterization really holds it up.
Yeah.
But it's still missing a little something for me to keep it in that A+ range.
Okay. Well, listen, that's awesome. You guys bumped it up a little bit. I'm glad we got to watch it again. One of my favorites now.
It really is.
Second A+ for Russell.
Top 25 yet?
Not of all time, no. But I will say I tend not to put in really new-ish movies in the top 25 because I like to reflect on them a while. But Silver Linings Playbook, I think, is probably about top 25 status at this point.
Oh.
All right, well, let's move on now to the old classic, which is Brick, Justin's pick for this month. Before we get to that, I do want to put the call out for our listener choice old classic, which we'll be doing at the end of the month in just a few weeks, actually. So if you have a listener's choice you'd like us to watch, we already have a couple of options in from months previous, but there's always time to get yours into the hat as well for us to choose. And you can do that as a comment on the YouTube page or on our Film Fanatics group on Facebook, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. Justin, let's hear about Brick.
Brendan, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is a high school loner still recovering from his breakup when his girlfriend Emily, played by Emily DeRavin, leaves him a mysterious call for help mentioning several mysterious words: brick, tug, and pin. As Brendan's investigation eventually leads to the discovery of Emily's dead body, he takes it upon himself to discover who murdered her and why. Neo-noir is a genre seldom seen in contemporary cinema, so I thought for a fun and slightly less volatile discussion, the very original film Brick would be a good choice for, as per Justin tradition, stirring the pot. Although the story does take a bit to get going, and a couple entertaining albeit over-the-top moments peppered throughout the entire film, the setting of high school for what could have easily been a hard-boiled detective story works incredibly well. Only having a budget estimated as slightly under $500,000, director Rian Johnson crafts a story that escalates in tension slowly while making use of a number of interesting characters along the way, notably from Gordon-Levitt. The way the film is shot does an excellent job of respecting its noir roots, particularly with shadows near the climax, but still doing its own thing. While not everything hits the mark, and whether or not it goes on too long could be very easily argued, Brick is still a strange, original neo-noir that truly shows off the amount of talent Johnson has behind a camera, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what'd you think of Brick?
Well, when it comes to Brick, I think that I'm a big fan of noir and just neo-noir in general, so I really appreciated the stylistic nature of this film. I liked the nature of shadows, as Justin mentioned, the close-cut cinematography, and I liked the setting. I thought that it was interesting. It was also kind of distracting. That's the problem with me, is that I think it's a really cool idea, and it kind of works because it is a strange, kind of a dreamy sensation to the film that it is kind of out of place, and that works. But at the same time, it is a bit distracting because you think to yourself, I'm not sure this is how people would act. And that does kind of, maybe that was the point of the story, the way it was originally done. That was the delivery, to kind of make that point, just to be different. Honestly, maybe that's what works, and that's fine. But I have to admit, I did feel that some of the decisions and some of the scenes didn't quite fit in context. Maybe they were supposed to be open to interpretation. I do feel like it does take a while to get going, but maybe that does work. I feel like the climax is worth it, but maybe it does run on a bit too long, I will admit. Still, I have to admit, I feel like Levitt did a great job here. I'd actually never seen this one before. I know Justin mentioned it, and I appreciate you bringing it. I think for the stylistic components and the acting and just the real originality in this film, I think it just oozes something truly unique, and it's definitely worth watching. I'm not sure if everything worked, but overall I would also give it a B+.
All right. I'm a little bit lower on the scale than you guys. I think it's a valiant debut attempt by Johnson, whose Looper I absolutely love, but I thought the movie just came off overall as more of like a student film with the quirky directing, the average to decent acting, forced writing, and a mishmash of styles. I think Gordon-Levitt did a good job, but I think he's still learning how to effectively deliver drama. I wasn't quite as blown away by his performance as you guys were in this. I think he does a decent enough job, but much like the movie on the whole, isn't amazing. I thought it was a little bit long. The length didn't bother me so much as it might for some other people, but I was engaged, and the story itself is certainly a good mystery thriller. So, for a valid effort, I'll give it a C+.
Oh, wow.
It didn't blow me away, but I can see there were some good ideas at play here. I just don't know. Obviously Johnson was still finding his footing.
For me, I kind of wish that they had wound the story a little bit tighter.
I could agree with that.
Yeah, they kind of left a lot of stuff open. If they had just tightened it up a bit, kind of like moved along a little more, connecting the dots instead of just leaving things open for a while. Honestly, for me, that was one of the difficult issues, is that I wanted to stay invested in the details, but it would take a long time for the next reveal.
For the next one to come.
Sometimes I'd honestly forget, what was he trying to figure out this time? I will admit, it's hard to stay invested the whole time because you're just kind of getting into the mood, but it kind of loses the plot there. The thing that did bug me a bit was that, I don't know, the characters are quirky. The lame one, the 20-year-old mob boss with his cloak.
Good for noir, not so much for neo-noir.
I think it's a cool homage. I get he's quirky. Maybe the guy could dress like that, but it just stuck out to me. Like, I just don't know why it's happening. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough for me to pin down. Like, stylistic, I thought it was great, but it had some issues.
Yeah, I thought it was definitely interesting. I think it's cool that Looper is only the third film that he's done. So, obviously, Johnson has come a long way from this movie. What was the one in between the
Brothers
two?
Bloom.
Right, the Brothers Bloom, which I thought was okay. I think I gave that like a B-. That was more of a story issue than it was, with his directing. But, clearly there's some seeds of goodness to come, and you can kind of see that he's definitely, like you guys said with the shadows, like he's definitely trying some new things, and I don't know if it all quite came together, but I was engaged in it, at least.
I think it's a unique experiment.
Yeah. I mean, with the exception of like a couple details, it for the most part works, and I would never have expected it to.
Yeah, I think the mystery element of it works.
Well, for one thing I didn't like about it was that I didn't really care about the death, to be completely honest. Like the whole thing that the plot is hinging on,
mysterious death,
and I didn't really care that much about her anyway.
Right.
I mean, I didn't really think there was much about her as a person that was that great. And like I said, maybe that's also an homage to noir. There's the hot dame that you can't get enough of, but she's kind of bad for you.
But you don't know why. Yeah.
She's all bad news. So I get it. I still didn't like her, you know. But then again, I don't normally like those characters in noir. So
So it makes sense.
There you go.
Point.
There you go. I mean, you're like, the main guy's awesome. Come on, Dick Tracy. Why are you falling for this girl? She's obviously bad news. Come on. You know better.
Can't help it.
Can't help it, man. It's hey. One thing I like about him, which some people might not like about his films, I've noticed this with Looper, they take their time. Like, things happen, but it takes a while. There's a lot of space where you're just kind of sitting with these characters. There's a lot of time without any real sound.
That is true with Looper, yeah.
Just like very quiet moments. It can be slow, but it's interesting. He keeps his films interesting, but not always necessarily the most entertaining constantly.
Well, good pick, Justin. I had always heard about it. It didn't blow me away as it did for you, but I mean, I'd always wanted to see it, and I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt, so
Can't go wrong there.
Yeah, so I'm glad we got to watch that one.
It was good.
All right, well, the Oscar A to Z will wrap up our show, and that's American History X. And this is a 1998 film that got nominated for Edward Norton as Best Actor, who ended up losing to Roberto Benigni, that classic from Life is Beautiful. But let's hear about American History X from Joe.
The Nazi can't win over the Holocaust guy, I guess.
That's right.
That would be that'd be a bad taste.
Too soon.
Now I know why he lost, though. It's not really a legitimate reason, but politically correct, I guess.
That's right.
Life is Beautiful is a good movie, though. Well, American History X is a 1998 drama directed by Tony Kaye and written by Dave McKenna, starring Edward Norton and Edward Furlong. Two Eds, so it's Ed N, and if there was a third one,
Ed, Ed, Eddie.
That's right. Classic. As well as Elliot Gould, Stacy Keach, and Avery Brooks. Best Star Trek captain.
Yeah.
It follows the story of two brothers, Derek, played by Norton, and Danny, played by Furlong, who become part of a neo-Nazi organization. After Derek returns from prison after 3 years for manslaughter, he seems to change his beliefs, but he must try to prevent his younger brother from making the same mistakes. This film is told mostly non-linearly, implementing the use of flashbacks, often, to show Derek's decline to hate-fueled crime. This film is unflinching in its political and cultural perspectives. The characters and their dialogue may seem over the top, but sadly are too engrossed and reminiscent of reality. McKenna's script is detailed and naturalistic in presentation of how powerful and complicated hatred can be. The story isn't just about racism, but also about class struggle, basic moral values, and family dynamics. Even more so, it shows how unforgiving these beliefs can be. Norton gives yet another fantastic performance, as to be expected, truly becoming this tortured character. Furlong is fairly believable, and the other cast does well, including Avery Brooks, who honestly steals just about every scene he's in, of course. While the narration can be a little distracting at times, and the film does border on preachy, it's still an excellent exploration into the very complicated subject matter, and I give it an A.
Justin, let's go to you and see what you thought of American History X.
Tackling the theme of racism in film is perilous territory. Too often, most directors will flirt with the matter, but completely underplay it. Fortunately, American History X is a film that goes that far and then some, telling a tale about descending into corruption and hate and the fight for redemption if it's at all possible. It's ugly, and extremely hard to watch at times, but it's probably better than any other film I can think of in terms of showing how ridiculous and yet chillingly real hate groups actually are. Norton and Furlong give fearless performances as the film cleverly uses cinematography, lighting, and color to depict how and why the two brothers may have ended up the way they are. It all ultimately leads up to a conclusion that's every bit as shocking and heartbreaking as it was when I originally saw this 5 years ago. American History X is an incredible film that still makes prominent observations about society, and I give it an A+.
I would like to point out before I go that one of our listeners had pointed out that we did that top 5 black and white post-1970 films a couple of months ago, and they were wondering about this movie, which is a lot in black and white, but we were focusing mostly on like all black and white, or
Mostly
90%, maybe in black and white. So this certainly has a lot of black and white, and I think may have been on a few of our lists if we did include it. But yeah, I mean, what a powerful film. Norton is outstanding as the lead, as Joe mentioned, to be expected at this point. But I gotta say, I think it's hands down, still 15 years after the fact, his greatest performance. Oh, wow. Even many of the supporting performers are very strong here. You mentioned some of them. It's most certainly not an easy watch, especially if you're racially sensitive, but it is a film that pulls no punches, like you guys both mentioned. And the decision to have the flashbacks in black and white and the scenes during the present in color was a very strong one by director Tony Kaye. It's got a few minor flaws. The unwelcome comic relief with the friend character played by Ethan Suplee. I wish we got a little more background on Derek's motivation for being a skinhead in the first place. We get, like a taste of it, but I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more about that, especially since the flashbacks are, I think, by far the strongest scenes in the film. I also could have used actually a little more in the prison, his Nazi buddies in there and his newfound friendship. From an aesthetic standpoint, the tint, when it shifts back to color, I thought was a little bit off. It looked kind of washed out, like whenever they would transfer back to color. But, I mean, these are fairly minor gripes. It's an incredible film, obviously. I give it an A-. And you'd seen that before, Joe, right?
A couple times,
yeah. I'm the only one that was new to that.
Yeah, I've always really liked it. It's definitely always been up there for me.
Yeah.
It's a good movie.
I stayed away from it from the curb stomping.
Curb stomping wasn't that bad, though.
Good reason.
No, actually, the curb stomp... Well, I mean, I guess I didn't watch the 20 seconds or so where it actually happens, but...
Well, I mean, it's more of an illusion than actual
I certainly saw the setup.
You get the idea.
Yep.
That is interesting,
Loud
though.
and clear.
You think it's his best performance?
I really do.
Wow.
What would you say is his best performance, do you think? The guy gives some good ones.
Oh, now you put me on the spot. I mean, to be honest, that's probably up there for me. I actually always really liked him in Primal Fear.
Okay, I never saw that.
That's probably the one I need to see before I can...
Yeah. And the only reason I say that, I mean, I know it's like technically his first big one. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
But it's just like, I think if any role established like how dynamic he was as an actor, it was that one. I can't say why, but trust me.
I'm not a huge Gear fan, so I never saw it.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Like, for him alone. Like, the movie, you could argue whether or not it has issues or not. He is fantastic in it. I think that might be his best role.
Wow.
But American History X is probably
I'm sure a lot of people would probably say Fight Club as well.
Fight Club.
I thought it was way better than this. Than in Fight Club.
Fight Club's good. I actually liked him a lot. I think American History X is probably my number 2. I did like him as the Hulk, obviously, Bruce Banner.
He was a really good Hulk.
I thought he was really good as Bruce Banner, and I also really liked him in The Illusionist.
Oh yeah, he is.
That's a very good point.
That might be my second favorite.
So, like, there's a couple.
Yeah, The Illusionist is good.
There's about 4 or 5 like Norton performances that are like top notch for me.
Yeah,
I can't think of any that are like really, really bad.
Well, he's a good actor. What you gonna
the
do?
guy's solid, and he can really do a lot of different things. I mean, he obviously focus on the more dramatic or action roles, but I mean, I've seen him pop up in minor comedies, and in the Wes Anderson movies lately.
He's funny.
He's very funny as the Scoutmaster Ward.
Now, Edward Norton's always been one of my favorite actors. Like, he just he's like Christian Bale. He just he absorbs.
He embodies the role
completely in the role.
Yeah, it's like you look at one of those like Anderson performances, let's say, and then you look at this guy, and you don't even know that they're the same person.
He becomes a different person.
Absolutely,
and that's the mark of a great actor.
I would agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No denying that.
It's kind of a shame that Furlong sort of
really
fell
go
off
anywhere.
the face. Yeah, I mean, he got really heavy into drugs and stuff.
Well, I thought he was good in this, but it's funny. He didn't really age that much in the 7 years between.
No, and it was a little distracting.
Like, how old was he in Terminator 2? Like 13?
Yeah.
He was like,
I mean, he had to be
18, 19,
19 or 20 when they made this movie, and he's he's playing 16. He can pull it off.
It looks like he's 15.
But yeah,
just like the kid didn't age.
Well, and that probably affected him getting future performances. Yeah,
But I thought he was good. I'll be honest. It's funny. You pointed it out to me. I never knew it was the same person. Because I've only seen him in Terminator 2. Mm-hmm. I never thought the kid did anything else. He was
so when you've seen this before, it didn't click that it was the same
because
one.
Because he, shaved his head. I just completely disassociated it. And very different characters, so some talent.
That's true.
I'm just like, whoa, that guy had a career. He was in another big movie.
Yeah.
It's impressive. So he never did anything else after this?
Not
Really?
Not much. I mean, he'll pop up now and then in
random things.
Direct-to-DVD stuff.
It's a shame.
Sci-Fi Channel original movies.
Yeah, Sci-Fi Channel originals.
Really?
But not much.
That's a shame.
It is, because I think there's certainly potential that he had.
Well, not to point this out, but I do think Avery Brooks played a great principal.
Yes, he did.
What do you guys think of him?
Yeah,
no denying that.
He was one of the best supporting characters, and certainly a great principal. The resolve he has in this movie to really, really get Norton on the straight and narrow, and to try and
it's awesome
to help him turn his life around. Really, I mean, obviously, well, if you don't know, I mean, he's black, and so to be helping this neo-Nazi,
what a great person,
is it's almost like mind blowing, that
you'd even want to do it.
That you would, right? I think a lot of people would. In that situation, just write him off and say, well, look, he's in jail. Good for him. He deserves to be there,
And that's awesome that he doesn't give up on him.
Yeah, he doesn't.
The one performance that really blew me away in American History X was actually his buddy in prison, who has probably made...
he's great.
Who has probably made the most compelling argument to how stupid racism is in literally 2 minutes.
That's why I wanted to see more with him.
Yeah, you're right. That's an important part of the movie, and it's crucial to his character development for Norton's character, and yet it is actually fairly short in the movie.
Yeah. Well, it seems to turn him fairly quickly. I would have liked to see a couple of more scenes of them sort of bonding.
Because it took more time, and it seems more okay, when he got into prison, it's like he almost began to change immediately. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's that's not typically how it works.
He starts working with the black guy, doesn't talk to him, and then he makes a joke and laughs so you weren't really that racist to begin with?
Right.
It was all a facade, I guess.
Yeah, that part I really wanted to see more of.
Yeah.
For sure. But no, I mean, it's obviously a great movie, so I'm glad we watched it. We're really hitting a good streak with these Oscar movies lately.
Thank God.
Yeah, we
patriotic time.
Yeah, we were hitting the doldrums there for a while.
Started with America.
All right, well that's gonna wrap it up for the show. End on a high note, as we like to do here. Joe, anything new on the Merlin channel?
Guardians of the Galaxy will be next, most likely. We did actually post a review for Hercules and the one guy that saw it at the time for Lucy. So you get a general feel about some things we liked and disliked about it. So check that out if you want to. Other than that, we'll probably do Galaxy. probably Turtles, and I think the last movie for the summer everyone will get together for will probably be Sin City 2.
Makes sense.
Sounds pretty good.
That'll probably wrap up the big summer.
Not Step Up.
Step
Up all in.
No, not Step Up 10. No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, if you are not subscribed yet to our channel on YouTube, you can certainly do that. We'd love to have you aboard. The Twitter feed is at Film Fanatics Pod, and our Facebook group, as I mentioned earlier, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And that'll do it for this week. Thanks for listening. Bye.